Ever since I started upgrading my home theater, I've learned that the cheap plug-and-play sub-kits that promise thunderous lows often end up sounding like a whimper once the room's walls start to absorb the energy. I've been there spending a weekend wiring up a budget sub, only to discover it can't keep up with the action scenes in the movies I love. That's why I've been digging into a real-world solution that claims to deliver high output, low-frequency power without the usual compromises. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The package I'm looking at is the Harmony Audio Universal Dual 12-inch Subwoofer Bundle. It comes with two MJP1222 12-inch subwoofers, a ported enclosure, a 1500-watt PRXA 1500.1 amplifier, and a heavy-duty 4-gauge wiring kit. At first glance it sounds like a complete system that could finally give my living room the punch I've been missing. But the big question is, does it actually translate that massive spec sheet into usable bass that feels tight and controlled, or is it another case of big numbers, small results? I started by looking at the design of the ported box. A ported enclosure is meant to let the driver move more air, which in theory gives you louder, deeper bass than a sealed box. In practice, this means the system thrives in larger rooms where there's room for the sound to develop. I set up the bundle in a 25 square meter family room with a modest amount of acoustic treatment, a couple of carpets and curtains. After wiring the subwoofers with the supplied 4-gauge kit, I cranked the PRXA 1500.1 up to 80% of its power while watching a new action movie. The first thing I noticed was how quickly the bass filled the space. The low end was undeniably powerful boom-like hits from explosions slammed through the floorboards, and the rumble of a car chase felt visceral rather than just a low-frequency hum. That's the practical strength of the ported box. It can push the drivers hard without choking, thanks to the extra airflow the port allows. The 1500-watt amp delivered clean, consistent power, so there weren't any of those nasty distortions that cheap amps introduce when they're pushed past their limits. However, the same ported design also revealed a weakness. In a smaller setup, the resonance of the port can become a problem, especially for music that has a lot of sustained low notes. While watching a bass-heavy concert video, I heard the sub start to boomy around 40 Hz, a little too much for my taste. It wasn't outright distortion, just a lingering tail that made the sound feel a bit out of focus. If you're mainly listening to music rather than movies, or you have a tighter listening space, you might need to dial back the level or add a low-pass filter to tame that excess. Another real-world consideration is the wiring. The included 4-gauge kit is definitely overkill for most consumer setups, but it pays off if you're feeding those 1500 watts with a dedicated power amp. I ran the cables from the amp to the subwoofers through a wall conduit, and the heavy-gauge conductors kept the voltage drop negligible even at high volumes. For anyone who's ever had their sub cut out during a climax because the amp ran out of headroom, this is a solid reassurance that the system can sustain the demand without stuttering. Who should buy this bundle? If you're building a dedicated home theater, especially in a larger room where you want that cinema-style impact, the Harmony audio package hits the sweet spot. The dual 12-inch drivers give you enough surface area to handle deep lows, while the 1500-watt amp makes sure the power is always there. It's also a good fit for car audio enthusiasts who want a plug-and-play solution that won't require aftermarket upgrades to the wiring or power supply. The fact that everything you need comes in one box means you avoid the trial-and-error of matching an amp to a sub, which can save both time and money. On the flip side, if you live in a small apartment, have a modestly sized media room, or mainly listen to music that benefits from tighter, more precise bass, you might skip this bundle. The ported enclosure can overwhelm a compact space, and the sheer power of the amp may be unnecessary, even wasteful. In those cases, a sealed subwoofer with a smaller amp would likely give you more control without the risk of excessive boom. Another practical concern is heat. Running a 1500-watt amp at high output generates a noticeable amount of warmth. In my test, the amp's vents stayed hot after a 2-hour movie marathon, so you'll need to make sure the enclosure has enough clearance for airflow. It's not a deal-breaker, but it's something you'd want to factor into your installation plan, especially if you're mounting the amp inside a cabinet. Overall, the value of this bundle comes not just from the headline numbers but from the fact that it eliminates a lot of the piecemeal decisions you'd otherwise face. You get two well-matched subwoofers, a high-power amp that's designed to feed them cleanly, and cables.